I never thought betrayal would come wrapped in the warmth of home. That day started like any other. Gray skies over Manhattan, the hum of traffic below my apartment window, and the lingering taste of stale coffee on my lips. I was 25, living in New York, juggling freelance work and weekend brunches, still believing that love, if painful, at least came from outside, not from within your bloodline. But I was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just come back from an interview, hair frizzy from the rain, heels killing my feet, and mind racing with anxious thoughts. I didn't expect him to be there. I didn't expect her to be there either. But most of all, I didn't expect them to be together. I pushed open the door and called out, "Mom?" No answer. "Eli?" Still nothing. I walked further inside. The air was oddly silent. No TV, no music, not even the familiar tapping of my mom's nails on her phone. And then I saw them. Not in bed, not in the way you're thinking, but in something so much worse. They were holding each other in the kitchen like the world around them had vanished. Her hands around his waist, his lips just inches from her hair, their eyes locked, not with panic, not with shame, but with a strange kind of peace. My heart didn't break. It shattered. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My fingers went cold, my mouth dry. I stepped back, and the floor creaked. That was when they noticed me. She turned first. Her face went pale, but only for a second. Then came the soft gasp from Eli, like he hadn't expected me home at all. That's the moment. That exact second. That was when everything fell apart.
They say storms don't just appear out of nowhere. There are always clouds first. But I think I was too blinded by love and loyalty to notice them forming above me. When Eli and I met, I was 22. He was older, 25, confident, with the kind of smile that felt like a warm blanket on a cold day. We met at a bookstore downtown. He reached for the same copy of The Bell Jar and made a joke about it being the most depressing meet cute of all time. I laughed. He smiled wider. And somehow, that moment led to 3 years of something I thought was real. He wasn't perfect. No one is. But he made me feel seen. He'd bring me tea when I had deadlines, listen to my half-baked ideas about writing a novel, and hold my hand like it meant something. I brought him home for Thanksgiving after 6 months. That was the first time he met my mom. She looked beautiful that day, not in a vain way, but in a sharp, polished, powerful way. She always had that kind of presence. My mom had me when she was 20, raised me alone in Brooklyn, worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. She was strong. She was fierce. She was everything I wanted to be and everything I was terrified of becoming. They got along well. Too well, maybe. At the time, I thought it was sweet. She teased him about his hair. He complimented her cooking. They laughed over wine while I washed the dishes. It felt like family, what I always wanted. But over time, I noticed things. Small things. He'd ask how she was more than he asked about my day. Sometimes he'd quote things she said, like they had private jokes. She started wearing lipstick more often when he came over. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was jealous of how easily my mom connected with people, that maybe I was just insecure. One evening, I remember coming home early from class. I walked in and heard them laughing in the kitchen. Just the two of them. They were baking something. Cookies, maybe? There was flour on the counter. She had on an apron. He had flour on his cheek. They looked like friends. Too friendly. I stood there for a second too long. She turned and smiled at me, like nothing was strange. He waved, wiping his face, and I smiled back, convincing myself I was imagining things. That's the thing about slow betrayal. It's not loud. It whispers. It lingers in the air like a song you don't know the words to, but you can't stop humming. I wish I had listened to the quiet. I think the worst kind of betrayal is the one you saw coming and still closed your eyes to. There were signs. Of course there were. It didn't all happen in one day. It was a quiet build-up, a slow slide, like sand slipping through your fingers while you convince yourself your hands are steady. Eli used to text me good night, every night, no matter what. But then it became every other night. Then just a thumbs up emoji. Then silence. I asked if he was okay. He said he was just tired from work. He always looked tired lately. Or distracted. His phone would buzz at dinner. He'd glance at it and flip it face down. Once I saw M on his lock screen. I thought it was Mark, his coworker. Or maybe I wanted to believe that. I remember coming home early one evening. Eli was already there. He was talking to my mom in the living room. They were sitting too close, too relaxed. I stood at the door for a few seconds before stepping in. They both jumped, like kids caught sneaking candy. Mom laughed, said they were just talking about how proud they were of me. Eli nodded too quickly. I told myself it was sweet, that they cared about me. But something inside me flinched. I felt it, and I buried it. There were other moments. Once I found a coffee mug in the sink, Mom's lipstick on it. But Eli was the only one home that day. I asked him about it. He shrugged, said maybe she dropped by. He was probably right. She had a key. Still, it didn't feel right. Or the time I overheard them laughing on the balcony. I was in the shower. They didn't know I was home. I couldn't hear what they said, but it wasn't just polite laughter. It was intimate, soft, like they shared a world I wasn't part of. I told myself I was being jealous, paranoid, that trauma from old relationships was creeping in, that I should be grateful they got along. I gaslighted myself over and over until the doubt became normal, until my gut was something I muted. Now, looking back, I wonder, did he choose me so he could get to her? Or did she see something in him I didn't? Were they drawn to each other from the beginning while I was just the bridge? It's easy to blame them, but part of me still blames myself for not asking harder questions, for not listening to the silence between their words, for choosing comfort over truth. I didn't want to see the red flags, so I painted them white. And that's on me. There's something about silence at night that makes you feel smaller. I used to love the quiet. It felt peaceful, safe. Now, it just reminds me that something is wrong. It started subtly. I'd wake up at 2:17 a.m. and Eli wasn't beside me. I'd call out, no answer. Sometimes I'd find him in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone with the fridge door half open. He'd say he couldn't sleep, that he was just getting a snack. But there was never food on the counter. No mug, no crumbs, just him standing in the glow of the refrigerator light, still. One night, I heard the front door unlock gently. I wasn't dreaming. The soft click echoed louder than it should have. I got out of bed, heart pounding. By the time I reached the hallway, Eli was already in the living room. He acted like he had been there the whole time. I asked him where he was. He said, I took the trash out, but the trash can was full. And then there was her. My mom started coming over unannounced again. Late in the evening, after I got home from work, she'd say she just happened to be in the area, that she missed me. But she never really stayed long. 15 minutes, 20 maybe. Sometimes I'd walk into the kitchen and they'd go quiet, like I'd interrupted something. There was one night I won't forget. I came home earlier than usual. The lights were off, but there was music playing faintly, something classical. I stepped in quietly. Their voices were in the kitchen, muffled, close. When I pushed the door open, it stopped. They were standing apart, not touching, but their faces looked like they were trying to rearrange emotion too quickly, like actors who'd forgotten their lines. I smiled and pretended I didn't notice. We all sat down, drank tea, talked about nothing, but I couldn't stop hearing the silence that followed my footsteps when I entered. After that, I began to notice locked doors. The bathroom, the guest room, even the pantry ones, locked from the inside. When I knocked, Eli would say, "Just a second," but his voice sounded distant. My mother would walk out of nowhere and say she was just grabbing something. Always at the same time, always with a too casual smile. I told myself I was losing it. I even Googled symptoms of paranoia more than once. I didn't want to believe what I already knew. But something had shifted. I could feel it in the air, like a storm, building behind a locked door I didn't have the key to. And the worst part? I still loved them. Both of them.
My 26th birthday was supposed to be simple. I didn't want anything big. No party, no gifts, just dinner. The three of us. Me, my mom, and Eli. It felt safe, familiar. I told myself it would be a chance to reset, to forget the strange silences, the locked doors, the late-night whispers. Eli offered to cook. He said he wanted it to be special. And honestly, that made me happy. I missed him. Missed the version of him who used to make me pancakes at 1 a.m. Missed the way he used to hold my hand even while driving. He was never a perfect boyfriend, but he was mine. Mom showed up early. I remember thinking, wow, she really is trying. She wore a blue dress I hadn't seen before. She brought flowers, my favorite, white tulips. I thanked her. She smiled and said, "You'll always be my baby." I wanted to believe her, so I did. The dinner was nice. Warm light, laughter that felt real, or at least close enough. Eli served pasta and opened a bottle of red. We talked about silly things, old vacations, the time I broke my arm at 12 falling off a swing. It was almost normal, until it wasn't. After dinner, I went to the bathroom, just for a second. When I came back, they were standing close in the kitchen. Not touching, but something about the way they looked at each other made my stomach turn. It wasn't what they were doing. It was what they weren't doing. They didn't step back. They didn't laugh awkwardly or move away like they were caught off guard. They just stood there, frozen. When they saw me, they smiled. Too fast, too bright. I smiled back, but my chest was tight. Later that night, after they left, I sat alone in the dark. The cake untouched, the candle never lit. I stared at the photo we took together, me in the middle, their arms around me. And I realized something. That picture wasn't love. It was camouflage. They weren't celebrating me. They were distracting me. I should have cried. I didn't. I just sat there, in the quiet, and watched the candle burn down, unlit, unwanted, just like me. It was supposed to be just another photo. I wasn't even trying to capture anything meaningful, just a moment, a memory. Something to scroll past later and think, oh yeah, that was a good night. A few days after my birthday, I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone. I was looking for a picture of the cake, the one I never touched, but instead I found a shot I didn't remember taking. It was blurry at first, a little grainy, but when I tapped to enlarge it, everything inside me froze. It was the kitchen, taken from behind the hallway doorway, probably right before I walked in, probably when I still believed nothing was wrong. There they were. Eli, my mom. Close. Too close. She was smiling, not like a mom, not like a guest. It was a softer kind of smile, a knowing one. Her hand was mid-air, about to touch his arm. And Eli? He wasn't looking at her like a daughter's boyfriend should. He was leaning in, just a little, just enough to make my stomach twist. And then, the worst part, they were alone. I hadn't come in yet. This wasn't a freeze frame after I said hello. This was before anyone saw, before anyone could pretend. I don't remember taking the photo. Maybe my finger slipped. Maybe fate decided I needed to see what I refused to believe. For a while, I just stared at it. Zoomed in, zoomed out, tried to explain it away. But the camera doesn't lie.
It doesn't rewrite stories or soften betrayal. It doesn't care about family or promises or all the years you spent convincing yourself that love is enough. I set the phone down, walked to the sink, ran cold water over my hands until they went numb. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't even a kiss. But it was enough. Enough to know I wasn't crazy. Enough to stop lying to myself. Enough to finally say out loud what my heart already knew. They had crossed a line. And now I had proof. I couldn't sleep. Not after that photo. Not after what it told me without words. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise. But instead, I got up. I grabbed my keys. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say. I only knew that if I didn't say something, I'd explode from the inside. It was 2:03 a.m. I stood outside her apartment door for at least 5 minutes. I could see the light under the door. She was still awake. I knocked. It took her a moment to answer. When she opened the door, her face shifted. Surprise, concern, then something else. Guilt. She wore a robe. Her hair was loose. She asked, "Is everything okay?" I didn't respond. I walked past her and into the living room, the same couch where I used to sit with her and talk about everything. And now, I could barely look at her. She followed me in. "Sweetheart," she said, "what happened?" I held up my phone. The photo was on the screen. I didn't need to explain it. She stared at it for a long time. Too long. Then whispered, "That's not what it looks like." But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. I asked, "How long?" She looked down. She said, "It wasn't planned. It just happened." That sentence broke me. It just happened. Like love was an accident? Like betrayal was a slippery floor and she just fell into it? I wasn't yelling. I didn't throw things. I just stood there, barely holding myself up. "I needed you," I said. "After Dad died, I needed a mother, not a mirror." She flinched. Her eyes watered. "I never meant to hurt you." "You didn't just hurt me, you erased me." She started crying. She reached out. I stepped back. For the first time in my life, I saw her not as a mother, not as family, but as a woman who chose herself over me. I walked out, left the door open. I didn't slam it. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. The silence of 2 a.m. never felt so loud. She called me the next morning. I didn't answer. Then again in the afternoon. Then, around dinner time, a text came through. "Please, just let me talk, please." I stared at it for a long time, and maybe I shouldn't have, but I went. When I got there, she looked tired, older, as if one night had aged her a year. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen from the photo, but in the morning light it looked smaller, less forgiving. She didn't waste time. She looked me in the eyes and said, "It was love." I blinked. She repeated it, softer this time, like she was convincing herself too. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't meaningless. It was love. I felt like the floor had disappeared under me, like gravity stopped working. I asked, "Love? With my boyfriend?" She said, "It didn't start like that. He would come by, we would talk. At first it was just harmless. But then I started feeling things I hadn't felt in years, things I thought were gone. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. She kept going. I didn't plan this. I didn't go looking for it, but it happened. And I know how it looks. I know what you think of me. But what I felt, what I feel, it's real. Real. That word stuck in my throat like a bone. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't even breathe. So I asked one question. And me? Was I ever real to you? She froze. That silence, it told me everything. In that moment, I realized she wasn't trying to make things right. She was trying to justify them. She needed me to believe that love excused everything, even betrayal. But I wasn't a child anymore. I stood up, pushed the chair back. Her eyes pleaded with mine, but I looked away. I said, "I hope it was worth it." And I walked out again. This time, I didn't expect her to follow, because maybe she did love him, but she stopped loving me a long time ago. I didn't pack much. Just the essentials. A few outfits, my laptop, the journal I stopped writing in 2 months ago. I didn't even take the framed photos on the wall. The ones of us smiling, frozen in moments that clearly didn't mean what I thought they did. I left the key on the counter. There was no note, no final goodbye, no dramatic last words. I was done performing grief for people who never stayed to watch. The apartment felt smaller than usual, like the walls had shifted overnight, pressing in on me, reminding me of everything I had ignored. Every red flag, every unanswered call, every time I convinced myself that it's not that bad. But it was. It was betrayal dressed in familiarity. I looked around the room one last time, the chipped coffee mug still on the sink, the potted plant I kept forgetting to water, the scarf I wore when Eli first kissed me, still hanging behind the door. I didn't take it with me. Some things don't belong in the next chapter. As I stepped out into the morning, the city felt quieter than usual, like even the noise had taken a breath for me. I didn't call a cab. I walked. 1 block, then 2. My feet knew what I couldn't say yet. I was done. Done trying to fix what others broke. Done pretending loyalty runs in blood. Done loving people who only loved themselves. I didn't cry. Not anymore. The tears had dried up sometime between her saying, "It was love," and me realizing I didn't recognize her voice anymore. When I reached the intersection, I didn't look back. Not once. And for the first time since it all fell apart, I felt free. Some mornings, I still wake up wondering if it really happened. Like, maybe I dreamt it. The betrayal. The lies. The silence that screamed louder than any argument ever could. But then I see the empty shelf where those framed photos used to be. And I remember. Healing didn't come all at once. It wasn't like flipping a switch or crossing a finish line. Some days, I felt strong, like I had moved on. I'd laugh with coworkers, walk through the city without thinking of them, drink my coffee without feeling that bitterness at the back of my throat. But other days, I'd hear a voice that sounded like his, smell a perfume like hers, or walk past a store we used to shop at. And just like that, I'd unravel. Quietly, without anyone noticing. That's the thing about healing. It's not neat. It's messy and inconsistent, and sometimes makes you feel like you're going backwards even when you're moving forward. But still, I kept showing up for myself, even when it was hard. I went to therapy. I stopped blaming myself. I let the anger come, and then I let it go. I cried in the shower, then dried off and went to work. I deleted old texts, blocked numbers, lit candles at night, and whispered prayers to no one. I forgave her. Not for her, but for me. Because I deserved peace more than I needed revenge. Because I was tired of letting their choices live rent-free in my chest. I'm not healed, but I'm healing. And that is enough. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. And I didn't send it to ask for anything. Not an apology, not guilt, not even closure. I sent it because I needed to say it, for me. After weeks of silence, of letting the dust settle, of trying to figure out what healing even looked like, I opened my phone and typed, "I don't hate you. I don't wish you pain. I'm just done trying to make sense of people who knew exactly what they were doing and chose it anyway." I sat there staring at those words for a while. I didn't reread them, didn't ask myself if I sounded strong or kind or petty. I just pressed send. Then I turned my phone off and went outside. The world didn't stop. The sky didn't change. There was no lightning bolt or dramatic pause. But something inside me clicked. I realized I had nothing left to give them. Not my heartbreak, not my confusion, not my silence. They had taken enough from me already. I wasn't going to hand them anything more. That message, short, honest, quiet, was mine. Not for revenge, not for forgiveness, just for freedom. And once I sent it, I didn't look back. They tried to reach out. Eventually, the texts came. "Sorry I hurt you. I wasn't thinking. It wasn't supposed to happen that way." But the thing about apologies is, they don't undo anything. They don't unbreak trust. They don't unsay words. They don't unlove what was loved in secret. I read their messages once, then deleted them. Not because I was bitter, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I had learned something they never did. My peace is not up for negotiation. I used to crave those apologies. I thought they would fix me, that hearing sorry would somehow glue all the broken pieces together. But they didn't, because what I needed wasn't a word. What I needed was respect. What I needed was honesty from the beginning. What I needed was for someone to choose me loudly and clearly when it mattered most. Now, I don't want your sorry. I want my standards. I want to never lower my expectations just to feel loved. I want to never question my worth when someone else fails me. I want to never again wait for people to treat me right. I've waited enough. Apologies might ease your conscience, but they don't rebuild bridges you burned on purpose. So no, I don't forgive you because you said sorry. I forgive myself for ever thinking that I didn't deserve more. And that is the only closure I'll ever need.